Good afternoon to you. 4:06 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news, baby. Coming up, Congressman Bob Good will be with us at 5:30. One of the lawmakers who voted to kick McCarthy out. We'll get his rationale and what comes next. And we'll chat with you at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. You know, a lot of journalists like to claim that they've got a bombshell to share. It's a bombshell, this news, but I have to say the reporting this week by Lee Smith in Tablet Mag very much qualifies. Headline, high-level Iranian spy ring busted in Washington. The Biden administration has now suspended Iran envoy Robert Malley, helped to fund, support, and direct an Iranian intelligence operation designed to influence the United States and allied governments, according to a trove of purloined Iranian government emails. This is a massive deal, a massive deal. And we've only seen some of the pieces of this spill out into public, but now we're starting to get the whole picture. Joining us now to explain what this means is Morgan Ortagus. She's the founder of POLARIS National Security and a former State Department spokeswoman. She joins us on the phone. Hello, Morgan. Good to have you with us.
Hey, good to be back. Thank you so much for asking me.
This seems like a wild, wild story and a very troubling one. Tell me what's happening here.
Well, we're still all trying to figure it out. It's mostly in the media, but I will tell you, I woke up about a week ago reading this story, and it was very much in foreign policy channels. And I sort of had my mouth drop open whenever I read through the number of people that had been either knowingly or unknowingly agents of influence for the Iranian government. So let's just take this back. Let's peel back the onion a little bit and provide some historical context for our listeners, Vince. First of all, the special envoy for Iran in the Biden administration is a guy named Rob Malley. He's well known in foreign policy circles. He has a very, very, very different view of the world than, say, Mike Pompeo or I did. But Rob is actually, he was let go from his job, or really he's placed under, I guess it's like a suspension because he had his security clearance suspended. And he's actually, now we have learned, he's under FBI investigation. We don't exactly know why. They're not telling the public. You know, the State Department spokesperson who took my job, that guy keeps saying that, you know, he can't comment on an ongoing investigation. But we know in order to take a presidential envoy, which is what Rob Malley was, we know that in order to take a presidential envoy, to take away their security clearance, and on top of it, to have an FBI investigation, whatever the offense was, had to be pretty egregious for all of that to happen. Now we know a publication called Semaphore and another publication called Iran International, they are reporting that they were able to access hacked Iranian government emails. And these emails show correspondence between either, at the time, they were all in think tanks, but people who had maybe been in the Obama administration or gone back to a think tank, or people who are in the Biden administration now, or they're outside advisors to Rob Malley. The Iranian government basically had this initiative that they developed called the Iran Expert Initiative. And this initiative basically sought to influence U.S. policy. You'll remember back in 2015, there was a massive debate on what's called the JCPOA, which is the Iran nuclear deal.
Yes.
Right? There was a massive debate about it. Republicans were against it. Not just Republicans, though. Chuck Schumer voted against it. Robert Menendez voted against that. I have to look and see what other Democrats voted against it. But it was a very, very controversial deal, which essentially gave billions of dollars in sanctions relief to Iran. The Iranians the Americans, we flew pallets of cash to the Iranians as a part of this deal. The Wall Street Journal reported that. So during this really, really intense debate, the Iranians, through their influence operation, were using American, think tankers and other experts to sort of push their positions in the American public in the debate. And what's worse is you saw one person who is still currently in government. As far as we can tell, she's not on leave. She worked for Rob Malley. Now she's over at the DOD in a highly, highly sensitive position. Her security clearance is supposedly under review, but she's a part of the Biden team, and she is on record emailing the Iranian Foreign Ministry, asking for things like talking points, asking for their opinion on if she should attend a conference in Saudi Arabia or in Israel. And so the emails look incredibly bad. And really all of this is, I think, calls to question the judgment of Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, but especially Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State.
Yes.
I mean, your entire Iran portfolio, your entire Iran policy, it was led by someone who's now under FBI investigation, and his outside and inside senior advisors were reportedly, a part of an influence campaign by the Iranian government. And keep in mind, this is not the Brits, this is not the French, this is not even the Saudis or the Qataris where we have American troops. This is the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, an enemy state, a state that to this day, as we are talking, have open and active assassination plots against former President Trump, against Mike Pompeo, against numerous other Trump administration officials.
Yes.
They walk around with security to this day because the Iranians are trying to kill them.
It's just amazing. And so why would an American, or why would anybody who works in and around our government do the bidding of the Iranians? I would think that the justifications, as shallow as they might be, either it might be national loyalty to the Iranian government or because they're getting paid to do that.
Yeah, I mean, part of the open question in the reporting is it was reported that by Iran International and Semaphore that paid travel to and from Iran was a part of this, the perks of being in this Iran experts initiative. And so, I mean, that's the big thing you have to wonder is, why would you agree to do this for the Iranians?
Yes.
You're talking about a hostile enemy state. And in fact, one of the guys who was caught emailing Zarif, who was the foreign minister at the time, even pledged his allegiance to Iran. This guy was Iranian American. He's met multiple times, at least 5 times. The Free Beacon has reported that he's met with senior Biden administration personnel, including the National Security Advisor. So while he's not in government, he has over email been caught pledging allegiance to the Islamic Republic of Iran. And he apparently has open season to go to the White House and have meetings with our National Security Advisor and his top team.
There is, you mentioned a Defense Department official by the name of Ariane Tabatabai, I think is her name. And she, initially, I noticed that when this reporting came out, the Biden administration's Pentagon immediately said, oh, we vetted her, she's fine, we're proud of her. That was the statement they released initially. And then within 24 hours, John Kirby started kind of reeling that back a little bit. Oh, we saw the report. We're going to take a closer look at it, that kind of thing. What is going – I mean, it's such a weird reaction here to have a meaningful, credible allegation that you have people within the administration who are acting as, basically influencers on behalf of the Iranian government, and then to immediately be like, no, there's no way that's true.
Well, and they walked that back subsequently whenever her boss testified on Capitol Hill. It was sort of like, yeah, actually everything's under review, and so the State Department spokesperson also in his briefing sort of, they were very, very careful. I think that they're probably a lot more concerned now because, my first thought was, these are just the emails that we know about.
Yeah.
What else is out there, right? This is just what Semaphore and Iran International have negotiated, or have been able to obtain, however they obtained it. But this is just what we know about,
right.
And so then the big question is what else is out there?
Well, another piece of this is you mentioned at the outset that the Biden administration's Iran guy, their top Iran guy, Rob Malley, the Iran envoy, was suspended months ago, and the news of his suspension was broken by Iranian state media, not by any American news outlet. The Tehran Times broke the news of his suspension. And if you were scratching your head at the time as to how did the Tehran Times get this scoop, it does feel like the pieces are coming together now as to how that occurred. If you have people who are very tied into the Iranian government who are close to Rob Malley, that sort of seems like an explanation for how the Tehran Times got that.
I have no clue, but it was really weird. There's another publication that actually had a recording of another senior NSC official, one of his private meetings talking about Iran. So listen, there's a lot of palace intrigue. I have no clue how these publications are getting all of this. There's a lot of palace intrigue. But the one thing that I can tell you is that the Biden administration continues to do really strange things to to empower Iran, to empower the regime that actually undermines their own policy. So it was 1 year ago, in September of 2022, that I wrote a detailed op-ed in the Wall Street Journal that said, wait a minute, why is the Biden administration undermining their Russia policy? The Iranians are sending these suicide drones to Russia to aid them in the fight against Ukraine. And so on one hand, you've got all this rah, pro-Ukraine, send all this money. But on the other hand, and then on the other hand, you're essentially, funding and allowing the Iranians to send over these suicide drones that are helping Russia.
Right.
So the Wall Street Journal jumped on that when I sent in the op-ed because it was kind of unbelievable. And I got to tell you, a year later, I have more bad news, Vince, to report on that front. In about 2 weeks, the arms embargo, the conventional arms embargo against Iran will expire at the UN. And the current U.S. ambassador to the UN and the Biden administration have done nothing to try and keep that arms embargo in place. So 2 weeks from now, it will not be against international law for Iran to send Russia ballistic missiles.
And we just gave Iran a ton of money to enable that very activity.
$6 billion.
So this is,
$6
so once again, another conflict where the United States is funding both sides of the same war.
Yeah, that's the easiest way to say it. We are essentially doing that. We have, everything that we do. When you look at this, and I was just talking to Gabe Miranha, who runs for Polaris for me, who I know has been on your show, and I said, Gabe, how can they have this Ukraine policy and not try to go after the Iran arms embargo at the UN? How could they just let it expire? And Gabe said, well, they're lying. They're worried about provoking Putin. And if you look, Vince, in every story that you read that sort of says, why has Biden slow-walked the aid? Why has Biden done this? Why has Biden done that? Why have they hesitated? Why is this war going on for 20 months, Vince? And that is because every time that there's a chance to be decisive, the Biden administration will say, well, we're really worried about provoking Putin. Well, I've got bad news for you guys. The genie is out of the bottle. Putin has been provoked. He invaded. And so all you're doing, really, all these policy actions, all they do is actually prolong the war effort. It doesn't surprise me considering how they conducted themselves in Afghanistan, but this is this is an F+ for foreign policy.
Forget provoking him. We're arming him. We're arming Putin,
right?
And we're funding his war. He's entirely dependent on energy exports in order to fund his economy, and all we're doing is killing American energy and enabling the petro dictators around the world to be much more enriched. So yeah, all we do. Time and time again is fund the worst people and then have to fund the people that are trying to defend themselves against those awful people.
I agree. I couldn't agree more.
It's so crazy.
But anyway, I know I'm bad news Sally, but I hopefully breaking it down for you and your listeners. But I do think it's important because as we have these debates and these discussions about Russia policy and Iran policy, I think there's more to drop, right? We still do not know why there's an FBI investigation into a senior Biden official. Frankly, I think all of this stuff is pretty scary. I mean, our government could have been infiltrated. This administration could have been infiltrated at the highest levels with people who had unreported and unknown communications with one of the premier enemies of the United States of America.
A massive scandal and a lot of media disinterest in this story, of course, unfortunately. Morgan Ortagus, thank you very much for your time, as always. Really appreciate your assessment today. We do have a lot to get to today, including these Democrats who are all of a sudden pretending to be deeply concerned about America's borders. The goofy New York City mayor, Eric Adams, yesterday announced that he is traveling to Latin America, in the words of the Associated Press. Can we say Latin America anymore? That seems like bigoted, right? Probably. To discourage people from seeking asylum in the city, as New York City struggles to handle a massive influx of migrants that have overwhelmed its shelter system and strained financial resources. The Democratic mayor is set to visit Mexico, Ecuador, and Colombia during a 4-day trip this week. I assume he's not just going to the resort towns. He's not just going to Cancun. New York City has absorbed almost 120,000 migrants over the past year. That would be illegal aliens, with hundreds still arriving every day in need of housing and employment. Quote, "We want to give an honest assessment of what we're experiencing here in this city," said Adams. "We are at capacity." Don't come. We're at capacity. That's the message, really. So Eric Adams is going to fly through Mexico, Ecuador, and Colombia to say, do not come. How often does that work out? You remember Kamala Harris saying that? Do not come. Do not come. And did it stop anything? The do not come message? I don't think so. In fact, I don't think that stopped literally anything. And it may have even made it worse when Kamala said that. It's amazing what these Democrats think they can do. You will not be able to stop this by telling people not to come. In fact, they're just going to be reminded that New York City is a place to go. Let's see. We're going to tell them that coming to New York doesn't mean you're going to stay in a 5-star hotel. It doesn't mean that. The mere fact that you come here, you automatically are going to be allowed to work, said Eric Adams. Yeah, it's too bad. They'll be slumming it in 4-star hotels instead. Sorry, the 5 stars are all filled up with other illegals. So that's the big trip that the New York City mayor is making. So it's goofy because who cares what the New York City mayor does, A? Why are you involving yourself in foreign policy, taking, I assume, a taxpayer-funded trip all over the planet? And B, it's a good thing. This is a good thing because at least it keeps the focus on the illegal immigration crisis, our collapsed border. So I don't know if he's meaning to do this or not, but this is not going to help Democrats. The more focus that Democrats give to the failures of Democrats, the more it's going to wake people up. So Godspeed, Mr. Mayor. Keep up the insane work. We're right there with you. 429. Well, good afternoon to you. It is 4:34 here at News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Congressman Bob Good will be with us at 5:30. He's one of the people who voted out Kevin McCarthy yesterday as Speaker of the House. We'll ask him to explain the rationale behind the vote and also what comes next. A lot of people now throwing their hat in the ring to become the next Speaker. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. I want to bring your attention to a story that is breaking today out of Newsweek, and it involves what we've seen the manifestation of this many, many different ways. But the Biden administration has routinely been targeting its political opponents using the weapons of government to hurt political opponents, to lock them up, to intimidate political dissent. And it's one of the most disgraceful episodes that our country has ever experienced. And it's at the hands of Democrats controlling the levers of power. Boy, do they loathe, quote, democracy. It's not the thing that they want to defend. It's the thing they want to subvert. They're not interested in preserving healthy, robust debate and elections. They're interested in suffocating that. They want to shut down the flow of information. They want to censor. They want to use the government and the big tech companies working in concert or under duress to censor American citizens. And they want to criminalize dissent, or at the very least, leave you with the impression that there will be real consequences if you take an opposite view politically. For instance, listen to Joe Biden very recently in a video that they even shared on Joe Biden's Twitter account. He doesn't know how to use Twitter, so somebody else posted this for him. Here's what he sounds like.
The MAGA extremists across the country have made it clear where they stand. So the challenge for the rest of America, for the majority of Americans, is to make clear where we stand.
MAGA extremists. It never changes, he said. These MAGA extremists have made it clear where they stand. He's talking about American citizens. He's talking about American citizens. They're MAGA extremists, he says. And the reason he uses language like that is to demonize them, is to dehumanize people who take a different view politically. And that leads us to this piece today. Newsweek magazine, exclusive. Donald Trump followers targeted by FBI as 2024 election nears. Published in Newsweek today. Author is William Arkin. The federal government believes that the threat of violence and major civil disturbances around the 2024 U.S. presidential election is so great that it has quietly created a new category of extremists that it seeks to track and counter: Donald Trump's army of MAGA followers. The challenge for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the primary federal agency charged with law enforcement, is to pursue and prevent what it calls domestic terrorism without direct reference to political parties or affiliations, even though the vast majority of its current anti-government investigations are of Trump supporters, according to classified data obtained by Newsweek. Quote, the FBI is in an almost impossible position, says a current FBI official, who requested anonymity to discuss highly sensitive internal matters. The official said that the FBI is intent on stopping domestic terrorism and any repeat of the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol. See what they're doing? They're equating the events of January 6 with an act of terrorism, and they're saying that the FBI needs to exert all of its resources on these types of, quote, attacks. Notice what they're not talking about: left-wing violence, destruction, acts of terror, threats of intimidation, assassination attempts, nothing like that. Not even mentioned here. No, it's Trump supporters and domestic terrorism and a repeat of January 6th. But the Bureau must also preserve the constitutional right of all Americans to campaign, speak freely, and protest the government, Newsweek notes. By focusing on former President Trump and his MAGA supporters, the official said, the Bureau runs the risk of provoking the very anti-government activists that the terrorism agencies hope to counter, they say. Quote, especially at a time when the White House is facing congressional Republican opposition, claiming that the Biden administration has weaponized the Bureau against the right wing, it has to tread very carefully, said the official. That's a current FBI official. We have to tread carefully as we go after Trump supporters because Congress keeps accusing us of going after Trump supporters. Yeah, tread not. How about that? Don't tread on me, as somebody once said. That sounds kind of obvious. Instead of we have to tread carefully as we do this thing that Congress suspects we're doing. What? Newsweek spoke to over a dozen current or former government officials who specialize in terrorism in a 3-month investigation to understand the current domestic security landscape and to evaluate what Joe Biden's administration is doing about what it calls domestic terrorism. Most requested anonymity because they were not authorized to talk publicly, were reluctant to stray into partisan politics, or feared the repercussions of speaking frankly. Yeah, what happens when you tell the truth? Oh, man. You get destroyed. Or they'll figure out a way to wreck you. They will go, they'll Brett Kavanaugh you in a moment. Who's this lady? What rape party did you attend? Just for literally getting in the way of their agenda. That is the kind of stuff that they'll cook up. Newsweek has also reviewed secret FBI and Department of Homeland Security data that track incidents, threats, investigations, and cases to try to build a better picture. While experts agree that the current partisan environment is charged and uniquely dangerous, with the threat not only of violence, but in the most extreme scenarios, possibly civil war, many also question whether terrorism is the most effective way to describe the problem, or that the methods of counterterrorism developed over the past decade in response to Al-Qaeda and other Islamist groups constitute the most fruitful way to craft domestic solutions. Quote, the current political environment is not something that the FBI is necessarily responsible for, nor should it be, says Brian Michael Jenkins, one of the world's leading terrorism experts, a senior advisor to the president of the RAND Corporation. The FBI had this to say in a statement to Newsweek, quote, the threat posed by domestic violent extremists is persistent, evolving, and deadly. The FBI's goal is to detect and stop terrorist attacks. And our focus is on potential criminal violations, violence, and threats of violence. Anti-government or anti-authority violent extremism is one category of domestic terrorism, as well as one of the FBI's top threat priorities. The FBI further saying, quote, we are committed to protecting the safety and constitutional rights of all Americans. Notice what they say first, by the way, safety first, over constitutional rights. Constitutional rights, sure, we'll add those in too. Of all Americans, and will never open an investigation based solely on First Amendment protected activity, including a person's political beliefs or affiliations, end quote. Really? What did the FBI's Richmond field office do? What did they do? They decided that it might be a good idea to infiltrate and target Catholic churches for being too traditional. That was a radical idea in the eyes of some insane person in the Richmond FBI field office and maybe beyond that. What else would the Justice Department do? I don't know. Target parents as domestic extremists. Establish a national tip line to report anything that makes you feel uncomfortable at a school board meeting. Oh, no. Somebody raised their voice. Report them to the FBI. Go to school board meetings and monitor American citizens engaged in their First Amendment rights. We've had FBI agents who've disclosed that they had to do that very thing. Please, stop lying to us. Stop lying. We would never trample on First Amendment rights. We'll just send a bunch of FBI agents to watch you like a hawk as you open your mouth. Right. The White House declined to comment to Newsweek. The Trump campaign was given an opportunity to comment, did not do so. They say, from the president down, the Biden administration has presented Trump and MAGA as an existential threat to American democracy and talked up the risk of domestic terrorism and violence associated with the 2024 election campaign. Okay, so let's pause on that for a moment. If your top political opponent, in fact, Donald Trump is the favorite right now to become the next president of the United States. He is beating Joe Biden in every head-to-head poll. Joe Biden currently is in the White House, and he has access to the levers of power. And boy, is he using them to his own advantage. And so listen to this sentence again. The Biden administration has presented Trump and MAGA, Make America Great Again, as an existential threat to American democracy. Is that not one of the craziest sentences you've ever heard in English? Having a political opponent is a threat to democracy. That's what they're saying here. And so you can see why what comes out of that thinking is we have to remove Donald Trump from ballots nationwide. We have to lock him behind bars. We have to criminalize support for the guy. We can't win on the merits. We don't trust the voters, so we need to rob them. That's where this thinking leads to. And if you're thinking, well, is that possible? Well, then just look around. That's exactly what's happening right now. Why do they drop 90-something felony charges on Donald Trump just as the presidential campaign begins for 2024? There's not a mistake to that timing. Why is there a concerted effort nationwide to remove Donald Trump's name from the ballot? It's obvious. It is obvious. It's an election rigging exercise. Why are people getting so upset? What do you think? Why do you think? You know, has anybody ever paused for a moment? The left loves to empathize with carjackers. They love that. They love to empathize with people who will mow down a family in the middle of the street. They love to empathize with a child, with a murderer of a child getting shot sitting in a lawn chair out in front of some house. They're fine with, we got to think about what led them to that. What are the root causes? Really? What were the root causes of January 6th? Have you paused for a moment to contemplate that? Ever? Have you thought to yourself, what could we have done to prevent the rage that so many people, who, by the way, were not of wealthy means, these were not rich people. The Washington Post, nobody remembers this, but in the wake of January 6th, the Washington Post did an analysis of the people who had actually showed up at the Capitol. And guess what was a common theme among the people who showed up at the Capitol? No, it wasn't their skin color. It wasn't anything like that. It was their financial situation. A lot of the people who went into the building had a history of immense financial struggle, including bankruptcies, a lot of them. The Washington Post did a full breakdown based on the suspects. They went and pulled their financial histories, and they said, boy, that's a common theme. Look at all the financial struggling going on amongst these people. Do you not pause for a moment and go, well, holy crap. So do they have a legitimate grievance? Perhaps poorly expressed in some cases, but do any of them have legitimate grievances? How do we redress that? How do we prevent the American people from being angry at their government, so much so that some of them decide to break glass and rush into the Capitol building? How do we prevent that? No, that's not what actually happened, right? The aftermath of that was not to use any sort of empathy, not to contemplate whatsoever how you prevent a riot, how you keep society stable. They love to reflect on this Martin Luther King quote, a riot is the language of the unheard. They love saying that. when it comes to left-wing violence. But the second they feel that their power is threatened, they're like, nope, you don't hear them whipping out an MLK quote. You don't hear them for a moment even expressing that there must be some underlying explanation for all of this discontent. Not a single moment. In fact, the only answer is we will destroy. We will destroy this opposition, and we will make these people suffer. That's it. And so now, all these many years later, what has the FBI been doing? Newsweek tells us they're continuing to expand their efforts to target Trump supporters. Trump and MAGA Republicans are a threat to the very soul of this country, President Biden tweeted last September. A threat to the very... How could you let that person compete against you in a presidential race? If you say that he is a threat to the very soul of this country, if you say that his voters are a threat to the, quote, very soul of this country, an existential threat to democracy, how could you allow him to appear on a ballot opposite you? This is what they've been doing. They've been conditioning the public to think this way, to abandon democracy, not to fulfill it. MAGA Republicans aim to question not only the legitimacy of past elections, like Democrats have done every election this century, where Republicans win. Let me go back to the quote. MAGA Republicans aim to question not only the legitimacy of past elections, but elections being held now and into the future, Biden said. Biden's Homeland Security advisor, Liz Sherwood Randall, said this, quote, the use of violence to pursue political ends is a profound threat to our public safety and national security. It is a threat to our national identity, our values, our norms, our rule of law, our democracy, our norms. You think the left is a big believer in norms? You think? It was Victor Davis Hanson just talked about this past week in an excellent interview with Tucker Carlson. I can't recommend that highly enough. But this idea that the left uses words like democracy and norms to appeal to some sort of higher standard that we should all be living up to is poppycock. It's complete poppycock. Because what has the left done? Every single rule and norm to them is up to debate. In fact, let's erase it. Statues, goodbye. God himself, goodbye. Notions of gender, goodbye. Sanity in your schools, goodbye. Relationships between teachers and parents, goodbye. Goodbye to all of that. A sense of safety in America's major cities, goodbye. A standard for what it means to be an American citizen, goodbye. America's borders, goodbye. Remind me what norms they protected. Just give me the short list. I'll let you do 5, and I'll see if you can make it. What norms are they protecting? They're not protecting norms. Stop using our values against us. This has always been the project of the left, as it is stampeded through American history, has been always to, and especially now, especially this century, is to exploit the fundamental decency of Americans to advance their tyrannical ends. They tell you you're not a good person unless you accept this, that you're going to offend your neighbor unless you accept this, that the only way to operate as a good person is to accept this. And meanwhile, all they're doing is blowing up norm after norm after norm, creating new ones. They're not norms then. Norms are things that are, quote, normal, things that are constants, things that are true. And they're just eradicating them and then telling you you're on the wrong side because you're actually trying to hold to, yes, the norms of American society. So is this a reason to be worried? Yeah, it is. It's a reason to stay vigilant, for sure. And all the more reason why we need as many Americans as possible to wake up right now to what's going on, because we still have a country that can be saved. But it needs to be wrested from the hands of the people who would seek to destroy it. And in order to preserve the constitutional republic, we need to employ every tool at our disposal within that Constitution to do it. Because they want to tear it up. The rest of us would like to preserve it. All right, let's go to Chris calling in from Marshall now, line 3. Chris, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Good afternoon, sir. Always an honor calling from the front line of the heartland. I have said it since this news initially broke. They never dissolved the Disinformation Governance Board. The name says it all. It wasn't about elimination of disinformation. It's about governance of disinformation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's about allowing certain lines of communication and disallowing others. If it goes against the party, they shut it down. Chris, thank you. No, you're totally right. And in fact, look, there have been some victories in the pushing back against some of this. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit yesterday ruled that the Biden administration cannot censor election-related speech by using the big tech companies to do it. This fight is going all the way to the Supreme Court, and man, I am praying for a big win for liberty against tyranny. Ahead, we've got a lot more for you, including Congressman Bob Good will join us in the coming hour. He voted against Kevin McCarthy yesterday. We'll ask him what comes next.